eat, he didn't sleep. When he would focus, it was total. I can't tell you how many times he would call me. And Chazon Ovadia, Rabbi Tzvi can tell you, the Rabbi at that time in the Kollel, his office was in the yeshiva, in the Kollel. So from the office to the Beit Midrash is maybe 30 yards, maybe. How long does it take somebody to go from the office to the Kollel and bring me back? 30 seconds, 40 seconds, maybe. So the Rabbi calls me, I go, I come. Of course, in the meantime, in those 30, 40 seconds, what do you think he's going to do? He's putting his thumbs? What do you think he's going to do? He starts to learn. The problem is, once he puts his face in the book, he's not here anymore. I can't tell you how many times I would stand there for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. I would never, chas v'shalom, disturb him. I had to wait until he looked up. And sometimes it didn't happen for a while. He would call me. He would tell me, sit down next to me. And his mind was preoccupied with Torah. It was the Rav. So I'll tell you a story that you may or may not know. The story goes that when in his youth, he learned in, I think it was Musayaf, he literally didn't have what to eat. And there was a woman who had mercy upon him. And she would bring him lunch every day. One day she noticed that the plate was not just empty, but the plate was licked clean. She said that I must be hungry, so the next day she put more food. And she noticed again the plate was licked clean. She said, strange. He doesn't seem like a fellow with an appetite. He's always got his head in the book. She put more food, and again it was licked clean. She said, something's going on. The next day she brought the plate. She placed it in front of the Rav. The Rav never saw her come. The Rav never saw her go. He never knew she was there. She put the plate down and walked away. And on cue, through the open window, an army of cats descended upon the plate. In milliseconds, the plate was completely cleaned. She realized, of course, that not only did the Rav not see her, not see the cats, he didn't eat. And this wasn't one day, it wasn't 2 days. This was a Rav. He didn't know about food, he didn't know about sleeping. Once his mind became preoccupied with something, it was over. Even in his late 80s, this was a man who 2 nights a week would not close his eyes and stay up all night learning. I read this from Tzvi Chakak himself. Sometimes 3 nights a week. If we don't get our beauty sleep, we all know what we're like. To have 2 nights a week minimum, sometimes 3, deep in his 80s, he will be up learning Torah. The neighbors would say that the lights almost never seemed to go out in his house. They were constantly on. But his love of Torah was so much that for him it was literally life itself. I can tell you one time, he was here in New York. It was actually the last time I think I met him here in New York. So I had the zchut to eat with him breakfast. We were eating in a room that had a lot of Sfarim in them. A lot of books. But it was evident that the books weren't being very well used. And the Rav painfully looked at the books, and this is what he said to me. Miskenim ha-sfarim ha'elu, mi yilmad bahem. Poor Sfarim, poor books, who's going to learn that? The Rav heard from the books, because he knew that books had to be printed to be learned. And learn he did. You've seen the pictures of his house, 20,000, 30,000, nobody knows how many Sfarim. But he knew that. His knowledge was total. I can't tell you what it was like to sit in front of him. You would prepare for a week. You'd come to talk to him about a subject. You thought you had it down pat. And you would start to talk to him, and all of a sudden you realize that everything you knew, he knows. And things that you never even dreamed about, he's got in his pocket, but he never made you feel small. He never made you feel irrelevant. He never made you feel bad. He'd sit there and listen to you patiently, as if you had what to tell him. And then he would ask you a question, and he'd tell you, sorry, this place, have you seen this Sefer? Have you ever heard of it? Oh, it's over there. Let me get a few. I'll present a few. Here's your information. That resolves the problem. Okay. And time and time and time again. This was I was limitless. I had the zchut for a period of time. I had the zchut to buy the Rav Sfarim. I would bring him a list of the newly printed books, and he would look at them, and he would tell me this one. And the exchanges were just priceless. I'll give you an example, just to show you the all-encompassing knowledge. I brought on the list was a book called Nachal Eitan. It's a commentary on the Rambam. Rav looked at it, turned to me, and said, "Does it go past Perik Yud Gimel and Hilchot Shchita?" No, was the Rav didn't just know the contents of the books; he knew everything about them, how far they went, what was in them. So he said, "Does it go past Perik Yud Gimel? Is there something new in this particular volume?" What do I know? I just saw the Sefer on the shelf. I said, "I don't think so. I think it's just a copy of the previous one." He goes, "Okay, I have that one." I went home and I checked. Machal Eitan, Perek Yud Gimel, Hilchot Shechita. That's how far it goes. He didn't say it condescendingly. He didn't say it in any way pretentiously. He just needed information. Does it go past Perek Yud Gimel? If it does, I'm interested. If not, I already have it. So the love was so encompassing. Let me tell you, I once brought him from the Gaon Chida a sefer called Chadrei Batin. It was newly printed. And the Ram picked up the sefer. And he started to flip through the sefer. He said to me, Kam Masacha Lichtov. He kept repeating, Kam Masacha Lichtov. The Gaon Chida printed in his lifetime, and altogether over 70 books he wrote. Kam Masacha Lichtov. And now, as Baruch Hashem, the 6th volume of Shabbat has come out, I think it's his 56th sefer, we can now say about the Rav himself, Kama Zacha Lichtov. Kama Zacha Lichtov, there's more. I myself have seen a shelf and a half of Kitav Yad ready to go. A shelf and a half, and there's more. Kama Zacha Lichtov. Who is like this person? Who is like this person? Now, there's a beautiful story which I brought to many, many places. I think the earliest place is in the Maharak or Zarua. I think it's the earliest place. There's a story that goes as follows. There was a Talmid Chacham, there was a great scholar. There was a great scholar who spent most of his days learning one Masechet, one particular volume of Shas. It's called Masechet Chagiga. And he learned it, and he reviewed it, and he reviewed it, and he reviewed it, and he had Chidushim, he had new ideas on this Masechet, and again, and again, and again, he reviewed this particular Masechet. And one day when he died, a woman was in the room. And she went out and she said to people, you have to come, and you have to give honor to this man. This man who learned Masechet Chagiga, you have to come and give him honor. You have to make sure that you make a eulogy about him. You have to make sure there's an appropriate levaya for him. And people followed what this woman said, and they came and they eulogized him, and they said Hespedim, and they accompanied him to his place. And finally, along the way, they said, who are you? Are you his wife? Are you his daughter? How are you related to this man? So she said, no. I am Masechet Chagiga. I have come to cry for this man, because who is going to learn me now? Who is going to learn me like this man learned me? Spent day and night, year after year reviewing me. Who is going to learn me now? I have to cry for him. My friends, 850,000 people were at that funeral. Who knows how many Sfarim were standing there as well? You think anybody learns the Sfarim like the Rav learned the Sfarim? And you gotta be kidding. He didn't learn them. He didn't just open a sefer at random and learn a couple pages. Cover to cover, introductions. He read Mafdechot indexes. He read addendums. He read everything. I can't tell you how many stories there are about this. When he quotes Sfarim, he doesn't quote only what's in the middle, the main texts. He quotes everything. In the back of this sefer, there's an extra page over there. On the bottom of the page, it says this. He didn't claim, I just saw the new sefer. He quotes, there's a tshuva before Siman Aleph, before number 1, there's a tshuva there it's written. How many of those people standing there must have been these Sfarim who were crying? Who's going to open them? Yeah, we have computer programs, and some fellow may one day find one page on one of these Sfarim. Nobody reads them. Who reads them cover to cover? Who? Halavai would have to make that come in like that. 20,000 Sfarim? I could go on forever about the depth of his knowledge, because people don't realize the depth of his knowledge, but I have very limited time. You would think that the man's Torah was private. It was his own. It was far from the truth. Yeah, he had goals. He was very, very driven to achieve his goals in learning. His Torah was never private. Never. His Torah was the Torah of the people. From the earliest days of his life, his Torah was the Torah of the Jewish people. Lilmod ulilamed. For the Rav, they were not separate entities to teach and to learn. Learning and teaching for the Rav were not separate. They were one and the same. His learning and his teaching, he learned in order to teach. That was his everything. For the Rav, it became not merely an act of teaching, it was chesed itself, it was kindness. Because the only thing, my friends, that could separate the Rav from his Sfarim was the Jewish people. That's it. If somebody needed help, if he had to teach a shiur, he'd stop. Barring that, there was nothing. He knew nothing. And you have no idea his disconnection from the world. I just saw a video where his grandson says, In the middle of the night, sometimes he would be perturbed. He wanted to add a single sentence to something. Until he wrote that single sentence into the newest Shuvah, he couldn't rest. So he'd make his way to the study. This man who knew every single Tosfot and Shas and every single Mishnah, he knew everything backwards and forwards, but he didn't know exactly which switch turned on which lights. Not because he couldn't. He just made a calculated choice. Why should I remember that in place of something that is more valuable to me? Such was the love of the Torah of the Rav. He would give that up for one reason alone, in order to teach the Jewish people. And then he did this in three ways. At least. There are others, but at least three. Number one is Sfarim. Sfarim, he didn't simply write books. There are a lot of writers. He created an entire halachic rubric, an entire halachic codex. If people will want, people have already studied it, more will. People will recognize this achievement. It was not simply wrote a lot. There was purpose and there was structure in his writing. It's staggering. For those who have studied it and understand it, it's staggering. Do you know that Tehillim, the book of Tehillim, is divided into pieces that can be read? Some people read the entire Tehillim over the course of a week. Most of us can't read that much. Most of us try to do it over the course of 30 days, over the course of a month. If you look at the Tehillim, you'll see 13th day of the month, 15th day of the month, 12th day of the month. The Rav died on the 3rd day of Mar Cheshvan. Do you know which Tehillim in the 30-day division is in the 3rd day of the month? It's Mizmor Yod Tet. And you know what it says in Mizmor Yod Tet? Yom le'yom yabiya omer. V'layla le'layla yachavedat. The Rav's magnum opus, as well as the secondary Sefer Yachavedat, are mentioned in that pasuk. On that day, the day when the Rav passed away, thousands and tens of thousands of Jews, in their particular reading of the divisions of Tehillim, said that pasuk almost as if it was a stamp from heaven itself, that the Rav's Sfarim would live forever. He answered questions. He didn't just answer some questions. He answered questions from all over. A friend of mine who worked with us, whether I was speaking myself or Yehuda Naki, has already printed over 12 volumes of questions that were asked to the Rav. And more. The Rav answered all the time. And was there ever something that he shied away from? No. The hardest questions came to him. I want to share with you a story that is not in the books, because it's one I saw. So when I was learning the Chazon Ovadia, I had to school one day to hold the Rav's appointment book. At that time, he was writing Ta'arat HaBayit Chelik Bet. And this is what the appointment book read like. On this and this day, I wrote the Ta'arat HaBayit from this page to that page. On this and this day, I wrote the Ta'arat HaBayit from this page to that page. That was entry after entry after entry until one day. It says as follows. Amati b'lechtov Ta'arat HaBayit. I had to stop. Why? He said, I received a question from London. Apparently a young boy, Yarei Shamayim Ben Torah, an issue, was already engaged, getting ready to get married, and an issue arose regarding his yichus. Potentially Chalil V'chas, he would not be able to get married, or potentially a mamzer, Chalil V'chas. So the Rav put aside, in the love of his life, he put aside writing the Sefer Ta'arat HaBayit. And he investigated to see if there was a way to make this boy's life livable. Is there a way in which he could find a heter to allow this boy to get married? How long would you give up of your time, of your energy, and of your interests on behalf of somebody else? A day? 2 days? 3 days. After 3 days, you did what you could, right? For 3 days you thought about it, you came out, couldn't find something. 4 days? How about a week? When would you finally say, I tried, and I can't? You know, sometimes the answer is no. 2 weeks. 2 weeks, that's what I calculate of entries. The final entry says, Baruch Hashem, Masati Lo Heter. What was the next entry? On this day I wrote the Ta'arat HaBayit from this page to this page. So the next entry, on this day I wrote the Ta'arat HaBayit from this page to that page. Who does that? Think about 2 weeks, and you should know. 2 weeks of the Rav's thinking, immeasurable. 20 minutes of the Rav's thinking is incomprehensible. 2 weeks, do you know how many times Shas must have gone through his head trying to find a way to allow this? 2 weeks. Bilei Brahim. Ahavat Yisrael, the love that you have for the Jewish people. It's incomprehensible. The Rav was already teaching Shuvim. 17. My friends, calculate that. How many world-class poskim do you know? World-class poskim that for 75 plus years give of their time to teach every strata of Jewish society. Not just the Geonim, not just the super geniuses, not just the Avraham and Kola, who maybe will be able to understand what he's talking about. Every level, simple people, non-religious people. It didn't make a difference who they were. If the Rav could teach them, he would, and he didn't stop. The first day I got to Kollel in Chazon Ovadia, the Rav came. First day, he sits down and he says, my friends, the Midrash says that why did the story of Pilegesh B'Giva occur? This terrible tragedy that happened? Because that the rabbis didn't go from place to place to place to place to teach Torah. You guys can't do this. You guys have to go from place to place. And you have to teach and you have to teach. I looked at myself and I said, oh my gosh, I just got here. Now I gotta start walking around. But that was the Rav. And he wasn't just lip service by him, it wasn't just words. He meant it. How many times he would come over at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, he'd go from one place to another place, 10 places, 15 places in one night. How many times did it occur? But this was him. There was a case which happened here in New York. When I was learning Chazon Ovadia, he flew to America. Rabbi Yitzhak Rosh Kollel, who was now the chief rabbi of Israel, told me the story himself. He said, we got on the plane, an American Airlines plane, we were supposed to go to LA. There was engine trouble. That's a story to itself. There was engine trouble. The plane had to turn around and come back to New York and landed. So the Rav gets picked up from the airport. He calls somebody to come and get him. Comes to the house. Now listen, it's an old man. Nobody knows you're there, right? You're supposed to be in LA. What would you do? Take a safer out, you sit down and you learn. You have a few minutes, nobody's bothering you, nobody knows you're there. Wouldn't you do that? No. What does the Rav say? The Rav says, please arrange shulin, schools, shuls, yeshivot. I don't care, you set it up, I'm going, I'm here. Why am I here if not to teach? Pilei Pa'im, this was the Rav. His love of the Jewish people was incomprehensible. Incomprehensible. From his 17 years old, he taught and he taught and he taught. You don't think people feel when you teach them with love? The love that would pour from the Rav is indescribable. For those who are zochim to be close to him, but it's nothing if you were zochim to be close to the Rav all the time. He was involved in your life. He cared about you. He'd ask about you. He'd ask about your actions. He'd ask about your children. The love that flowed from him was just almost superhuman. It was almost indescribable. But let me tell you a story that I experienced, just to put this a little bit in focus. So part of my job was to be a little bit of a translator. So one time there was a man who came to speak to the Rav. He only spoke English. The Rav didn't speak English. So I was asked to translate. So I'm in the room with the Rav and this man. And the man had a question to ask the Rav that was crushing to him. It involved a child that had veered off the path. And the man was broken. The man was broken. So he's talking to me, I'm talking to the Rav. So whatever the Rav is getting, he's getting through a filter. And the man's telling me the question, and I'm filtering it to the Rav, and at one point the man breaks down. The man breaks down, he starts crying. He's just overwhelmed with him. What happens? I'm in the room. The Rav starts to cry. I'm not talking about a tear. I'm talking about the two of them sitting there crying, convulsing and crying. I felt so awkward. I'm the only guy in the room not crying. They're crying, and they're crying, and they're crying. Finally, the Rav hears a question. He did something he never did again with me. I can't recall him doing this a second time. He said to me, Ani Azor ala Sheila, I'm going to repeat the question. I said, well, you don't trust me. I've done this before. I'm your trainer. What do you mean? But then I understood. I thought about it and I understood. The man was going to hear an answer he didn't want to hear. The Rav wanted to be 100% certain that if he was answering a question with an answer that the man didn't want to hear, that he got the question right. So he says to me, ask him, make sure that that's the question. So I said to the man, this is what the Rav's going to answer. Is this the question? The man says, that's the question. So the Rav tells me, if that's the case, this is the halakha. Total clarity, absolute clarity, total clarity. Just one point about clarity, I have to tell you this. I had a Rebbe, his name was Rav Moshe Hershel, a famous Gaon, Ashkenazi. And he once told me about the Rav. He said, you know what, I know the Bikut, and I know the Yun, I know all of that. But you know what makes most striking to me about the Rav? You know, when a person has a lot of knowledge, a lot of these Bikim, they get confused. They have a lot of information. Imagine for a moment, my friends, if you scanned into your brain 10,000 books, what do you think your brain would look like? Maybe you wouldn't know what you'd be completely buffaloed. You wouldn't know what was going on. The Rav had those, everything was cataloged, everything was collated, everything was categorized. It was staggering. He said the greatest thing about the Rav is his clarity. Let me tell you something that people may not know. There's a book called Kol Sinai, which is probably the original writings of the Rav in Halakha in presentation to the people as a whole. And I was told when I learned Chasam Ovadia, I couldn't believe that the Rav wrote these the night before they were printed. The printer would come and say, I'm going to press tomorrow, I need what you got. And the Rav would write it on the spot. Anybody who looks at these, even 50 years later, is mesmerized by the clarity of the man. It's just amazing, done in total clarity. So at this hesped, I heard Rav Baruch Mordechai Ezrahi say that by Aaron, the pasuk says, "Vayiru kol ha'ida ki gava Aaron." The entire congregation saw that Aaron had passed. Vayivku et Aaron sheloshim yom kol bet Yisrael. The entirety of the Jewish people cried for Aaron for 30 days. You know what's interesting now? It doesn't say that by Moshe Rabbeinu. By Moshe Rabbeinu it says, "Vayivku b'nei Yisrael." את משה ואבות מואב 30 יום ויתמו ימי אבל משה. ויתמו ימי בכי אבל משה. It doesn't say called Beit Yisrael, the entire Jewish people. It says Bnei Yisrael, the Jewish people. Why by Aaron? Does it say all? So he said, because the Jewish people loved Aaron. Not that they didn't love Moshe, but Aaron was the one they went to for problems. Aaron was the one who talked to them. Aaron was the one to make peace amongst them. For him, called Beit Yisrael, there wasn't a single Jewish person that didn't cry. And at that moment he said, my friends, Chacham Ovadia was the Aaron. The love of the Chacham Ovadia that he displayed, that he gave to every single Jew was so amazing, so complete, that there was nothing that people wouldn't do for the Rav. And just in conclusion, the Rav himself brings the following mashal. The Rav says, brings a mashal was an emperor that was attacked constantly by rebels and all sorts of people that were making his life difficult. And each time the emperor would have to go to battle, there was one particular king from amongst his vassals, a warrior king, somebody fabulous. And this king would gather his army and come to join the emperor, and every time this warrior king would turn the tide. No matter how many armies were there, this warrior king would turn the tide. Well, the rebels finally got the idea that if they wanted to take out the emperor, why bother with the emperor? Go straight to the warrior king. Just attack him alone. Once they got him out of the way, they were safe. So indeed, they gathered the largest army they could, and they went against the warrior king, not against the emperor. So immediately, the people of the warrior king's city sent a letter to the emperor. Please, send your armies. We're being attacked. What did the king do? What did the emperor do? The emperor went and he took the warrior king and brought him to him. They left the city by itself. So they came to the emperor and they said, Emperor, what are you doing? Not only don't you send us an army, but worse than that, you take away the warrior king. What are you doing? So the emperor said, you've become too dependent on him. I think you can win the battles on your own. You've become too dependent on him. You need to learn that you can do it too. Well, they had no choice. The warrior king wasn't with them anymore. So they gathered their armies and eventually vanquished. They weren't successful. So said the Rav, sometimes, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even in the midst of a battle, takes away the warrior king, the one who was always there. In this case, it's the Rav. He's the one that we always went to. No matter what the situation, he was always there and he always took care of everything. He made everything go away. But maybe we relied on him too much. Maybe, what's the big deal? Pick up the phone, call Yerushalayim. I can't tell you every time at 3 o'clock in the morning I was calling Yerushalayim. Can't tell you every time. Maybe it's now some kind of indication from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we need to work on it ourselves. Indeed, the Kabbalim tell us that closer to the time of the P'tirah, the more a person is available to take some of the character, some of the uniqueness of the person. We're close to the time of the P'tirah of the Rav. Maybe we, each and every one of us, can learn to try to grasp some of that uniqueness. We certainly can't reproduce him. That's not possible. We certainly cannot, in some way, compare to him, but we can try to take a little bit, devote ourselves to something a little bit special, a little bit different, a little bit more. So that Bezrat Hashem, when Bezrat Hashem Mishim Sekin will come to her, once again, reunited with the Rav, will Bezrat Hashem be able to be Mekabel Panav B'Simcha Bezrat Hashem. And we only know Simachot Bezrat Hashem. Once again, a tremendous honor to be able to be Mishtatef in this tremendous honor.
I'd like to call upon Rabbi Gaon Yisrael Meir Yonah to say a few words. It's going to be in Hebrew. One of them Talmidot Muvakim Shel Harav to say a few words to Leot Alud.
כבוד אמר ואתה, ולמוראים הגאונים, במקום כל חייו להקיש, שלא יהיה ספק, אני בכל אופן לא בא לומר את דברי הספד, אני לא יכול להספיד, אסור לנו להספיד, לי בכל אופן אסור להספיד. כמובן עליו השלום, זו לא דמות שיש בדור הזה, לפי אני דעתי, שמישהו תקרא יכול או ראוי להספיד אותו. מי שצריך היה להספיד אותו, זה הגאון בעזרא עתיר. הוא אמר עליו שאם לא קם לישיבת פורת יוסף, בשביל להעמיד אותו דיין, הוא זה שצריך להספיד אותו. הגאון הרב פרנק, רבה של ירושלים, שאמר עליו שהוא יהיה הפוסק של אותו רבה, הוא זה שצריך להספיד אותו. הגאון יעקב עדס, רבי יעקב עדס, מזקני הדור הקודם, שבזמן האירוסין של הרב, האירוסין שהרב הזה היה צעיר בגיל 23, אמר רבי יעקב עדס, הוא וחכם עובדיה כבר עכשיו אמר אותה. זה המשפט שאמר רבי יעקב עדס. הוא כבר עכשיו אמר אותה. הם יכולים להספיד אותי. אנחנו יכולים להספיד. אנחנו יכולים לדבר כמו ילדים קטנים שמדברים על אבא שעזב אותם. אבא שברח, אבא שהלך, ומשיב אותם דבר, אז ילדים מדברים, ילדים צועקים, ילדים בוכים. זה מה שאנחנו יכולים לעשות. להספיד אנחנו לא יכולים. אני אגיד לכם דבר שהייתי בחודשים האחרונים של הרב בצער גדול ממנו, והיה לי קשה מאוד מאוד לסבול את המחשבה הזאת. הייתי רואה, וכל מי שהיה לידו ראה את הסבל הגדול שהוא היה נתון. היה לו ייסורי גוף וגם ייסורי נפש. ייסורים קשים מאוד מאוד, כמעט שאי אפשר בכלל לתאר אותם. היה מנסה ללמוד, מתאמץ ללמוד. עוד פעם יושב על הגמרא, עוד פעם יושב על הספרים, ולא יכול. עוד פעם מנסה, ולא יכול. ומתגבר פה, ומנסה לחטוף פה באיזושהי שעה. אבל לא יכול, ברוב הייסורים. ואני נזכרתי שלפני כשנה, אולי יותר, היה איזשהו זמן שאני מאוד מאוד דיברתי. פעמיים היה כמעט באיזה הפרש של כמה ימים. בבוקר שבאתי אצלו, 8:30 להיות אצלו בבית. הוא אמר לי משה פה לידי. אמר לי, תגיד לי, אתה יודע מה זה מיטת נשיקה? ככה שאל אותי. אתה יודע מה זה מיטת נשיקה? אמרתי לו, לא. אמר לי, תשמע, מיטת נשיקה לפי אבי דעתי, ככה אמר, אני אומר את המילים שלו, שלפי דעתו של הרב, ככה אמר, מיטת נשיקה זה אדם שמצליח להיות ביישוב הדעת עד היום האחרון שלו. להיות ביישוב הדעת ולהיות בבריאות ולהצליח ללמוד תורה עד הרגע שהנשמה שלו יצאת. והיה אומר את זה והיה אומר את זה עם דמעות. זה נקרא מיטת נשיקה. והיה אומר, אני חושב שצריכים להתפלל על זה. שנזכה למות מיטת נשיקה. שהשם ייתן לנו יישוב הדעת עד הרגע האחרון שהנשמה שלנו יצאת. אתה אמר, היה לו חבר לרב שקראו לו רבי יוסף קפח, שהוא היה חבר לזקין הגדול. והרב היה מספר לי ממש בהרגע, ובהשתוקקות איך שהוא נפטר. הוא נפטר ממש מתוך לימוד. ככה היה רבי יוסף קפח, ואני הוספתי לו סיפור על הגאון רבי יהודה אסד, שבטח הציבור מכיר אותו. רבי יהודה אסד היה אחד מהגאונים של הדורות הקודמים. הוא נפטר בעודו כותב תשובה. באמצע כתיבתו תשובה בהלכה, אז הוא נפטר. והלכו בשביל להכין אותו לקבורה, ואז ישבו הפרנסים ודיברו שיש לו כמה בנות בוגרות והן כבר מבוגרות ואין כסף בשביל לחתן אותם. אז מה יעשו? איך יחתנו אותם? נתן אחד מהם יצא שהגאון רבי יהודה אסד היה יהודי לפי תואר והיה גאון עולם, אבל אין ממנו שום תמונה, אין איזה צילום ממנו. בואו אנחנו נצלם אותו עכשיו, אחרי שהוא נפטר. נצלם אותו. ונעשה בקופי, נעשה הרבה תמונות, ונמכור בהרבה כסף את התמונות שלו, וככה נוכל, מה שנקרא, לחתן את הקלות, לחתן את הקלות שלו. וככה עשו, הלבישו אותו, יודעים, הושיבו אותו על כיסא, וזאת התמונה היחידה שיש לה בעולם רבי דאסה. תמונה שהיא לאחר אותו, ומי שיסתכל טוב ידע שהוא לא חי, מי שיסתכל טוב בעיניים שלו, ידע שיש לו פנים של אדם שלא חי. אני חשבתי שהרב לא מכיר את הסיפור הזה. אז הוא אומר לי, אתה יודע שכל אותם פרנסים מתו באותה שנה? ככה אמר לי. כל אותם פרנסים מתו באותה שנה. כי אומנם הם התכוונו לטובה, אבל עדיין הם פגעו בכבודו של הרב, לבוא ולצלם תמונה, אדם שנפטר, ולהושיב אותו בבתים, וככה לשים את זה. כאילו אין כסף, שהם היו צריכים טוב, בכל אופן, כוונתם הייתה טובה, אבל מעשיהם לא היה בזה, כן, טובה. הוא היה אומר לי, תראה איך זכו אלה, תראה איך זכה, כן, ואומר רבי דאסה, נפטר מתוך כתיבת תשובה, נפטר מתוך עמדות בלימוד תורה, והרבה נזכיר, לא זוכר. אני אומר לכם את האמת, כל החודשים האחרונים, תמה ועצוב. למה הוא לא זכה? הוא כל משתוקק לזה, צדיק יסוד עולם, גאון הדורות שהיה לנו, איזה נשמה, כל ישראל היו מה שנקרא תחתיו. איך הדבר הזה הוא לא זכה? וככה הייתי כמו מהרהר ככה, כן, במשך תקופה. בזמן הלוויה, בא לי כמו איזה הברקה כזאת, וקצת, החומר שנקרא, המחשבה שלי נרגעה. ואחר כך שאלתי גדולים, אמרו לי שנכון הדבר. כל הימים שקודם שהוא נפטר, אני לא יודע פה בחוץ לארץ אם היה, אבל בארץ הייתה התעוררות שהייתה הרבה אפילו כמעט לא נשמע דבר. איזה קבלות, איזה תשובה, ואיזה ש"סים שאנשים עבדו, כן, וגם פה עכשיו עשו ש"ס, איזה סיומים, ואיזה חיזוקים, כן, נשים בצניעות, מה שנקרא חיזוקים שאי אפשר בכלל להבין אותם. ואז אמרתי דבר כזה. הרב השלום, היה לו דבר אחד שחרון שהיה יוצא מן הכלל. אבל לא הייתה לו תאווה. לא הייתה לו תאווה בעולם יותר גדולה, מאשר לשבת וללמוד תורה. זה היה משהו שאי אפשר בכלל להבין אותו. זה היה בגדר כמו אדם, כן, כמו להבדיל אדם שהוא כמו איזה משוגע, כמו איזה מסומם שרוצה לקחת עכשיו את הדבר שלו. היה משוגע בשביל ללמוד תורה. משהו שאי אפשר בכלל להבין אותו, כן? הוא סיפר לי שכשהיה אברך צעיר בבית הכנסת סופיוף, זה דבר שהוא סיפר לי. הוא סיפר לי כי אני שאלתי אותו. שאלתי אותו כי שמעתי את הסיפור הזה, זה היה נראה לי סיפור קצת ככה משונה. אז שאלתי אותו אם הסיפור נכון, הוא אמר לי זה נכון. בבית הכנסת סופיוף, בתקופות מסוימות, התקרה הייתה דולפת מים. התקרה הייתה דולפת מים בזמן החורף. וכל הבית הכנסת היה מלא מים, היה מגיע בבוקר, כן, הוא לא יכול לשבת ללמוד. היה יושב במעיל שלו על הראש שלו, שם את המעיל לראש שלו. אחרי חצי שעה שהמעיל על הראש שלו, גם המעיל כבר נוטף מים. היה לוקח את הכרית, זה היה בית הכנסת של הבוכר, יש שם כריות תרבות כאלה. תופס שעות את הכרית על ראשו וככה ללמוד. אחרי 3 שעות גם הכרית כבר נוטפת מים. שם אותה בצד, לוקח כרית אחרת. מהבוקר עד הלילה האדם לומד עם כריות על הראש, איפה ראינו דבר כזה? מי עושה את הרוב כאלה? ללמוד עם כריות על הראש, וסגרית כבדה, עדיין לא כואבות, כן? כתוב שם משה רבנו שיצא כשמלכו את ידו. הוא ככה מרים כריות לבדו, אמר לי כן, ככה עשה. זה דברים שאי אפשר בכלל להבין אותם, זה לא המושגים שלנו, כן? האחים שלו, זה סיפור שלו, הרבה יודעים אותו, האחים שלו, בזמן בחרותו, היו קצת מציקים לו. חלק מהם, לא מתוך כוונה רעה.